alcoholic. I think we're awake, right? Yeah. All right, good. Just want to check on that. And thanks to the conference and everything you guys are doing. It's awesome. It's so good to. I still anytime I'm invited anywhere, I'm still kind of like, is it real? I still have that thing about me, which is interesting. And this reading that we got into and the process that we're continuing on is a progression of what we talked about last night. And as I go through this process of the admission, in my case, my admission of complete defeat and absolute powerlessness was not intellectual. The evidence of my life piled up on me to a point where it was unrefutable, where I could no longer delude myself, where all of that was completely knocked to one side, and I was given a moment of clarity. I was given the gift of grace. But the idea of grace, in my experience when I would go in and out of AA for nearly a decade, was it's fleeting, it's temporary, it's not permanent. And I can have one moment where the stars align, and I can have the ability or opportunity to make my approach here, and if I fail to take action, my alcoholism, my ego, and myself will start to grow back on me and separate me once again. And so what was going on in my third step that leads me into my inventory, which leads me into continue the work? Because really step 3, surrounding step 3, it's all contemplative to this point, really. A lot of my reflection on the things that happened for me to identify in step 1 and 2, they happened prior to my arrival. And I'm looking back and trying to piece together what had happened to me and come to some level of surrender here. And I don't even know what any of that means. I don't even understand anything that's going on here. I'm still defending this delusion, and I'm still tied to it, but I'm here reluctantly. And I return here, seemingly against my will, with all of you one more time. And what I love about Bill's writing to the third step, when he talks about the third step, and we say the prayer, God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. And right after he sneaks in the idea that we should think well before taking this step, after we've already done it. It's one of the best clues on how to sponsor in the entire book, right? Well, you get them to do it, and then you tell them what they're doing. Like, you gotta like get in there and trick them, You gotta. There's a little sleight of hand that goes on in AA, and at least that's how they got me. That's how you got me. If you would have come at me head on, I was so defended. You had to sort of climb in the side door, crawl through the window to get me. And so what is that deal that I've made? What is that decision I've made? Well, it doesn't mean a lot unless it's followed by intensive action. And in my case, actions that I had no faith in. I had no belief that I could lean on what you were telling me to produce results. I was terrified. Because what you have to understand is what it seemed like you were offering me, the proposition that you had for me was for me, I was going to exchange the one thing, the only thing that I ever found in my life that brought me relief, and that was the effect produced by alcohol. And what you're asking for is you're asking me to exchange that, and what it looked like to me in replacement of that, you were going to give me uncomfortable chairs and bad coffee and AA potlucks. Like, oh my God, what a trade! Listen, I'm a terrible gambler because if I win a bunch of money, I don't get excited. But if I lose $5, I don't have the temperament for it. And like a friend of mine said, we were playing poker. He goes, if you're sitting at the poker table and you look around and you don't know who the sucker is, you're the sucker, right? And that's what I thought was going on here. I'm like, I'm the sucker. Like, what kind of weird practical joke is this? And here I am. And here I am in the middle of it. And this idea in step 3, old timers would try and break it down for me, and they would give me the cute little story about the three frogs on a log, three frogs on a log. One of them made a decision to jump off. How many frogs are left? 3. And I go, that's real cute. That's adorable, But I'm not going to turn my will, my life over to it. But it's cute, And then a guy said something. I liked him because he was unlikable. That's what happens. I think maybe they say I heard people talk about how to find a sponsor. Find somebody who has what you want. I don't know. Maybe go to AA and find the guy that pisses you off the most, right? That might be your guy. That might be your person. But I hated him. I didn't like him at all. But I couldn't deny that he would say things based on his own experience that sounded different than the noise and the chatter. You ever sit in an AA meeting and it's all static, and then all of a sudden one of those old AM FM radios, the frequency comes in and bam, it hits you. And he talked about this proposition in step 3 and the continued work that I'm moving into, and the difference. He gave the metaphor of a chicken and a pig, and he said the chicken and the pig were walking through town, and they looked up and they were passing by this church, and the church was asking for help to feed all of the homeless people and the people who were hungry and couldn't eat. And the chicken goes to the pig. He goes, you know what? I think what we should do is we should go help those people. We should go feed the people who need the help. And the pig looks at the chicken and goes, well, what should we feed them? And the chicken goes, well, I think we should give them pleasure. The chicken goes, I think we should give them ham and eggs, right? and the pig looks back at the chicken and goes, well, for you that's a pretty easy decision, but for me there's a lot more consideration, and that's kind of what the deal is here. See, I think I'm coming to AA to make the chicken decision. Yeah. I'll come here, AA self-help. I'll do your little stairs, right? I'm going to join a gym too. I'm going to probably have somebody repair my credit. I'm going to get my life back together, right? But what's really going on here, it's more like the pig, right? What's really going on here, the thing I'm deciding to do yet I don't know it, I'm about to sacrifice and surrender and let go. And let go of something of no value, something that's killing me, but something that I'm clinging to, and I'm terrified. I'm terrified to do it. So I'll share with you kind of my experience with step 5 from a couple perspectives, and I think that as much as I got a lot out of my 5th step with my current sponsor. I did my 5th step with my current sponsor at his home in Vegas, and he has this large leather sofa in his home, and if that sofa could talk, it had to have heard hundreds or thousands of 5th steps. It knows where all the bodies are buried, that sofa, if there was a way, and I got a lot out of that, but without question and undeniably, the transformation that I've got in the spiritual divine process of a 5th step was in hearing them and listening to them. Exponentially greater, no doubt about it. So what's on there, and what am I being asked to do? Well, in my case, I'm being asked to confront the very structure of the delusion that I'm defending. I'm being asked, as I mentioned last night, I'm driving around the streets of Philadelphia with a map of Chicago. Someone's now telling me, hey kid, you ain't in Chicago, right? And that can be jarring. It can be jolting, right? Because you haven't yet given me I don't have any personal direct evidence of what I'm getting in replacement for the alcohol, what I'm swapping and trading here. I'm not going for the uncomfortable chairs and bad coffee, but I'm dying. That's something. But as Bill mentioned, it's not always an easy decision to face. And there I am. And so I had done, in the time that I had gone in and out of AA, I'd written some inventories. And this is not an uncommon experience. I was talking to somebody kind of before the meeting, and I don't know if, I hope I never forget the divine orchestration and gratitude that I should have for where I was placed and how the pieces fell. Because you never know whose hands you end up in. If you walk into a place like this area of, I'm super impressed with the AA in this community. We've been to a handful of meetings. They're all places that I would be happy to call a home group. And I remember maybe these places existed when I was making my approach, but I couldn't find them, or yet rather I was unwilling to come all the way in and sit all the way down. I was resistant. And yet if you're newer making your approach, you may not know yet what you've fallen into, but there's an answer and a solution here. And there are people here that are going to give you what was talked about last night, which is an adequate representation of the program of recovery. You can find that here. It's accessible here. But I spent a lot of time in AA, probably by my own defiance, seeking out people who gave me a non-existent representation of the program of recovery, right? What I wanted was the bragging rights of trying to do something about my life without doing something about my life, right? That's what I wanted, right? This was all a ruse for you to leave me alone. Leave me alone. Leave me alone, right? Leave me alone. Until you left me alone, and then I was all alone. And what do you do there? And the thing with the inventory, I remember I'm finally taking the directions that Bob so perfectly went through last night, the exact directions he gave me when I was writing my course stuff. And I remember going through it, and I remember thinking, like, if I look back at my life, I had this position of why I had the problems that I had, and if you had my life, you would have drank too, and you have no idea what I went through when I grow up. And I got people looking at me, they see me and they think, you should be this way or you should be that way. I bet you. People would always look at me and go, I bet you had a really easy life. Or they would have this idea about who and what I was, and it drove me crazy. And I would hide behind that. And I had a list of all my problems, where I grew up, how ridiculous those people were, how they had caused all of my troubles, how I just never had a shot in life. I drew the short straw. How those relationships, that series of relationships. God, I never met anybody who's so unlucky in love. I had I don't know. I got some blind spots, and that's sort of what we're about to uncover here in step 5. And kind of a funny story about blind spots. This is a more recent one. I was continued to, oddly enough, before I moved into 6 and 7 and started to change some things. Or before, rather, God started to change some things within me as demonstrated in 6 and 7, I would continue to be unlucky in love, And but one thing would happen, I started to have these series of relationships where all of my girlfriends, they had these cute dogs, right? And it was a weird amend thing, because I had this dog growing up, and I was putting this writing this thing on my inventory, this resentment at pets. Because because I thought they were a waste of time. They're heartbreaking and they're just a mess. And what I came to discover is I remembered when I was writing my inventory out I had this little pet, this little miniature schnauzer, right? Adorable thing. And my old man got it for me. It was one of his I'm going to make it up to you things. I promise you I'm going to take you to the Cubs game. And he'd always show up, brand new baseball mitt. He'd give it to you. I'll pick you up Friday morning, and then not show up. And then he'd show up a couple weeks later with the dog to try and make it right. And we had this dog, and I kind of loved this dog. This dog was like, man, this was my dog. His name was Buddy. Loved Buddy. And one day I come home from school, and somebody had left the door open, and Buddy had gotten out, and we lived kind of on a busy road, and that dog got hit by a car, and it was kind of whimpering around, and I put it in a box and tried to nurse it back to health, and eventually we had to put it down. But what I would do in my life, and I saw this pattern over and over, is that I would shut off things that could cause me pain or discomfort. I would dismiss them as inconveniences, dismiss them as inconveniences. But as I started to come to AA, and my icy cold heart began slowly to thaw a little bit, right? I started to love these dogs. I'm like, oh my God. And then the relationship would end. I wouldn't be so torn up about the girl, but God, the dog, the dog. And, I was talking to Bob, and I'm like, yeah, I'm just having this problem with relationships with dogs. And he goes, He goes, Henry, did it ever occur to you? You don't have to get in a relationship to get a dog, right? And no, it never occurred to me. Like these are the kind of blind spots I live with. You know, like like God could have put the Macy's Day Parade, 6 inches in front of my face, and I would have missed it because I can't see. I'm blinded, right? And so these are the types of things that are going to be under attack. These defense mechanisms, all the problems. She's the problem. Dad's the problem. Mom's the problem. Family's the problem. We're all the problems, And then what do you do when you're the smartest guy in the room? If you're the smartest guy in the room, eventually you're so damn annoying you're the only guy in the room. Right? You're all alone. And I started to look at my life, and I had a list of all those problems. Problem was, all those problems, they hadn't been in my life for years. So what do you do when all the problems you've got are gone and you still got a problem? Well, you got a really big problem. You got a really big problem. And I suppose you cannot heal what you don't reveal. And that's what I'm about to go into here. It's a process of seeing, or as Chuck would say, uncovering, discovering, and discarding. All that blocks me from what? I would listen. I remember I'd listen to Chuck, and there were a few guys that I'd listened to. I was a pathetic drunk. I would, you ever you need to be in it. You need to be around AA. You're not even sure why, but you started to feel a little bit better there, but you went back to drinking. And so I would drink, and I can't drink enough to pass out or knock myself out. So it's 3 a.m. and I'm putting on speaker tapes to just something to stop my head because nothing else will. And there were a few talks that I enjoyed that I could listen to. And Chuck's, I had no idea what he was saying. It was the way he would laugh. That's all it was, his laughter. I couldn't understand or comprehend anything he was saying, but the way he would laugh. And then he would talk about God, and he would say something in those talks. He would say, "That's all there is. There ain't no more." I'm like, what is he talking about, right? And I would just sort of like some crazy old man on some old recording, but it gave me comfort, and I would return to it. There was another guy, kind of the way God works. I work up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'm lucky enough to go to a group up there started by a guy that got sober out in the Pacific group, a guy named Hank J. Same thing. One of the funniest talks I'd ever heard, and he was hilarious. I remember I'd listen to him and I'd break out in laughter. And I'm stuck in that position. So how do I get out of there? How do I start to make a move? What do I do? And I made my approach, and I had met my current sponsor, and I stalked him and worn him down to agree to sponsor me, and he finally conceded. And then he gave me some unrealistic, assignments, hoping that would blow me off. But I stuck around, because you get this idea, right? There are certain moments in AA, and they are absolute moments. It's where my ego and self-delusion is absent enough to let a crack open up where God's grace can shine through. Where these moments in AA, like the moment where Bill was in the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel and he saw the gay chatter in the bar, and he had a moment of pause. He had something that caused him to turn left instead of right. He had a moment. And I started to get a few of these moments that would allow me to come here and start to get something approximating a foothold. However weak it was, I was here. I was with you. I was beginning to be with you. But I'd been with you before, and it wouldn't last. I remember these annoying old-timers would say a bunch of stuff like, if you don't do a fourth, you're going to drink a fifth, and that's cute, just like, come on, how corny can you get, AA, God, I just couldn't stand it, but the funny part was that I couldn't forget those things either, right? So they would come, and the reason cliches are ridiculous is because they're partly true, they're caricatures of certain realities. And Bill writes about that. We often talk about the wonderful promises that we get here, but there's some also horrible truths and other not so great promises. And one of them is that I'm a man who is destined to drink again. The same man will drink again. If I don't go through this process and transform, it's not whether or not I drink again, it's how long and when. I am going to drink again. That is my nature. Absent of a complete transformation, that is my destiny. It's my destiny. And so I got to come to truths like that. And so I'm doing this writing. And it's the first time, to the best of my ability, I was going to get honest. I was going to leave out those few things that you always leave out, the ones, right? The ones I'm taking to the grave. That thing happened that one night in Tijuana that ain't nobody knowing about. Nobody's know about that one. No, Probably going to leave off the latex industrial strength lubricant and power tools. That's not important, Nobody needs to know about that. I'm gonna hide some things. I'm gonna try and craft my image to my sponsor and all of these things that never worked for me. There was something absent in me this last time with my current sponsor, and that was I that voice that wanted to preserve, as the old timer in my group would say. He said, "Kid, you can't save your face and your ass at the same time." Right? And I'm a face saver, right? When I was thinking about my particular character problems and my defects and the issues that come out, vanity falls somewhere in the pole position. And I remember that accident I got in. I was thinking about this last night. By the grace of God, I crawl out of this thing. My ears hanging off. I'm all jacked up, and I see the lights, and I'm out of it. But this woman, I remember this, she was like an angel, and she had pulled over because she had just seen an accident, and she came up to me and she said something, and this gives you an idea of where my hierarchy of priorities was. She came up to me and she looked at me. She's it happened in Arizona, one of these Scottsdale, Arizona, very done up kind of gals, She looks at me and she says, "Don't worry, honey, your face is okay." Right? And, oh God, thank God. Woo! Okay. It just relief washed over me, right? That's okay, car's fine, we're good to go. It's my face is and yeah, there you go, right? And so this gives you an idea of where I was and how I value the world and what I saw, and that was what was going on inside of me. And so that thing I couldn't save my face anymore. I had to realize that if it meant the complete absence of the delusion of this reputation that I know I didn't deserve. I don't deserve it. And I ain't fooling nobody but myself. Right? I had this sponsee, and he was, without sponsorship guidance, he was excited. He got like a 60-day coin or something. So he starts calling people to, brag to them about, I got this coin. This is why I am the way I am, and calls up his mom, and says, "Mom, I just got to tell you, I found out, why everything was wrong. I'm an alcoholic, right?" And then she goes, "Well, you were the last person to know," and hung up on me, right? That's me. Everybody else already knew who and what I was. And so I wrote, and here's the way the structure looked. So I started with my old man. He was at the top of the list. And I didn't know what it even was or what to even do about it. Okay, so at this point I'm 33, 34 years old. My old man killed himself when I was 12. And what is that? What is the ghost of the old man? What is the idea in my mind? How does something that happened 2 decades ago haunt and push me around today? How does that happen? And I started to go across, and I'm resentful of my father. What's the cause? And my sponsor kept me directed to the directions. And the other thing about the writing that I had done in the fourth, and I'll do this with my guys, we keep it concise, just like Bill's direction in the book. I want to summarize and put bullet points, because I'm going to be doing the fifth step with you. If we have to expand on something, we'll have the opportunity. Because previously I had these sponsors that would have me write out, pages and pages of stuff. And while maybe I got some kind of temporary cathartic relief from that, in many ways, the writing of what had happened to me started to reinforce why I had the resentment in the first place. And I'm like, look at this stuff. That's right, I should be pissed off. That's good, That's right, And then I would move along to what was threatened. What I'm up against. God threaten me. And I'm capable of all the things I've always been capable of. And what did it threaten? Well, what didn't it threaten? All of it. All of it. That particular relationship shot through my entire life. And when I'm with my sponsor and we're going through the part in the book that talks about the turnaround, or referring to my list again. And what I'm going to do in this particular part is I'm going to set aside the wrongs the other person has done, and I'm going to resolutely, as I'm having a conversation with my sponsor, look at my own mistakes. Because as I'm doing my inventory, I only have access to the information that I have. I can only see the facts in the world as I see them. And when you have a relationship with someone who's armed with the facts and is going to now be more armed with the facts about you based upon their experience and their awakening, they have perspective that I don't have. They can see something from an angle that I'm unable to access. And I started to look at my old man, and I started to have something approximating compassion for him. And my sponsor talks about the idea that compassion and the idea that it comes from the root, or the idea to suffer with my father. I started to feel some kind of closeness to him. I started to see the torment and the trouble. And I started to look at it from an entirely different angle, really. And one of the things that I'll do with my sponsors is what if I had to sit in an old movie house, right? And I had to put together a highlight reel of all my greatest grievances of my old man. And you put up the characters on the screen. But instead in this movie, every character had to be blurred out except me. Right? Except the antagonist in this situation. And I had to look at my own behavior, absence of the alibi or justification of anyone else. What would I discover? Oh boy. I used my own man's suicide as a blank check to behave however I wanted for years. When it would benefit me, I would use it to garner sympathy. Right? And when I was embarrassed by it, I'd pretend it never happened, or as though I was orphaned. I would run or flee from it. I never saw it as the Buddhists have this idea of seeing things as they are, seeing things not as I would like them to be, not as I wish them to be, but seeing things as they are. And I was unable, due to my own delusion, to see my life as it was, factually, right in front of my eyes. And so I started to do that, and I would continue on with my family. And something started to change. I heard an old Sandy Beach, it was funny, he was talking to, I think, one of his sponsees, and his sponsee had a pretty bad childhood and was talking to him. He was a little older now, and he said, well, you may not have had one of the best childhoods, but you certainly had one of the longest, right? Because mine, in many ways, when I got here, it was still going, And that's my truth. And so I'm breaking these things down in the relationship with my father, and that leads to the relationship with my mother. And now I'm thinking back, and I'm writing down the things from this little house of secrets that I grew up in, and I'm looking at the truth and the reality, and I started to realize that and this sounds crazy, but it never occurred to me in all of my life that anyone was having an experience in that place other than me. They were just extras in my life, right? Everyone was there to serve me. Never occurred to me that my mother was having the experience in a 20-year marriage with a chronic alcoholic. What must that be like? Never occurred to me that my sister was the daughter of an abusive, violent alcoholic. What must have her experience been like? And then it never, ever occurred to me that my father was having the experience of a chronic, end-stage alcoholic, where all your hopes and dreams are gone, where your family wants nothing to do with you. What must it have been like to wake up in his body every day? You couldn't drink enough alcohol. You couldn't drink enough alcohol. So I started to see these realities. And I think what ends up happening, and this all bleeds in so many ways, I've come to see the steps as comprehensive and complete and together. And in so many ways, they have their own defined purpose to look at them very much individually. But I think something happens. It's like the old idea that as soon as I move toward the sunlight, the entire power of the universe conspires in my favor. Right? The more I move to you, things happen. My ability to see and my perspective shifts in ways it never did before. And that started to happen. And I looked back in the great truths with my mother and how that poor woman, I persecuted her. She bore the debt. She bore the debt of all of my rancor, all of my vitriol, and all of my rage. I denied that woman a relationship with her son for over a decade. I said things to that woman that no child should ever say to a human being, let alone their mother. I vilified her, and I hung her out to dry. And I blamed her for everything that was wrong in my life when she was only trying to do the best that she could with the very, very little that she had. And I saw some other things that embarrassed me when I saw them. I think that was the shame. The biggest thing looking back about all of this revelation in step 5 was how absolutely egomaniacal and selfish I was. Because I remember looking back and people would try and console me about, oh, your father died, how are you? And well-meaning people. It wasn't so much that I cared my father committed suicide. I cared how it made me look. Right? I cared how it made me look. That was the deal. You're making me look bad. Right? How dare you make me look bad? And my God, that thing was just all over the conversations I was having with my sponsor. And I'm telling him some of this stuff, and like Yoda, he just gets a moment of brilliance and looks up and goes, God, he goes, there's just no winning with you, is there? And then he goes back to doing whatever else he's doing, and he sees the truth. And he also pointed out, for every experience that I had, like forging an old piece of pottery in a flame or a kiln, all of the things that I went through and all of the difficulties that I went through would translate and result in some type of thing that had benefited me. So whether it was ambition or drive in business, that had come out of growing up without money, right? Whether it was the ambition that I had to perform in other areas of my life, I had actually received from this experience some virtues, some things that were benefiting me. And I was unable to see any of that. And I went on through this process, and I remember in the middle of my most heartfelt moments, I'm looking over at my sponsor, and just you feel like that God's present in the room. And I think right after I shared something, really deep and painful, and all the transformation was happening, he pops his head up and goes, "Oh, we got to get going. I got to pick up my dry cleaning by 4." Right? That was which is exactly how it should be, because he reduced or helped reduce these things that I thought were so impossible down to normalcy. He made me human. He made me like you. He made me one amongst many. No better, no worse. The same. The same. And there's an absolute magic in that sameness. There's a beauty in the sameness. Because my entire life I had to stand out and get the first place trophy and win the championship just to feel adequate. And I'd feel adequate. If I won the championship and got the trophy or the All-State Award, I would feel adequate for about 30 seconds. And then I would feel inferior again. And I'd have to start the old game again. And that's like that old Greek character Sisyphus. Right? It's the guy, he has to push the boulder up the hill only for the boulder to roll back down to the bottom, and he has to walk down and do it all over again. This was my life. This was the deal. And this is how I was living. And so from that inventory and that conversation with my sponsor, what my sponsor did is he illuminated all of the dark nooks and crannies of my past. He shone light on the things that I could not see. It's like, if you ever seen those old World War I movies, you got guys that are dug into those foxholes with just a little opening, and they got their rifle poking out, and their field of view is very limited. It's as though my sponsor came into the scene of my life and He dug me out of that foxhole, and He walked me around all of the facts of my life, and I could see the truth maybe for the very first time. And that in and of itself, I would come to realize was a moment. It was a beginning. It was an opportunity to continue to do the work. And the expression that I've made in step 3, what is that expression? Well, it means but little without continued action. You know, action is the ingredient. In my human condition, connected with divine grace, the thing, the activator that sets off the explosion in my life is my action, is my moving into these things. And so many of the things that troubled me in all of my Achilles heels, they would start to emerge. And I remember I would finish my 5th step with him, and he has a bedroom in his house in the back side. And I went back to that bedroom and I sat quietly for an hour. And when I was finished, I came back out and we reviewed the propositions in 6 and 7. And the one thing that had become clear to me for sure through this process in 6 and 7 is that I have no ability and no way to relieve or remove these things of myself and by myself. Of myself I am nothing. Without the power I'm lost. So I need to access the power. The power can transform me. So how do I access the power? And that's to continue the work. And so there's some things in me that changed. And how do they change? How do you know? I lived in Vegas for quite a while, and I had a girlfriend whose family lived down in Phoenix, Arizona. And we would do the drive, and you go through the Hoover Dam, and it's very beautiful. And you get a few miles down the road, and you see this huge sign, "Welcome to Arizona," right? And I was reading one time about this process of entering the world of the Spirit. There's no sign that says, "Welcome to the world of the Spirit," right? You just wake up one day and things are different. This looks familiar, but what's going on here? And I remember there were some specific things. It might be described as my whole attitude and outlook upon life changing. It might be described as that. I remember one of them, I was chairing this new meeting. And you know how we go from hating AA to I'm going to be the president of AA. Here, you get a coffee commitment, I'm the group chair, right? For 5 meetings and GSR. Here we go. And now I'm that guy. Now I'm that guy. Right? Now I'm going to get first place in AA. Watch. And oh my God! And then and then all those guys that saw me drinking, I'm just going to lap them on the AA race. Right? I'm going to go around and show you. And now I'm hair on fire for AA. And I'm chairing this new meeting, and I've got an idea of what this new meeting should look like. Right? I've got an idea, right? I mean, after all, I've gone to the promised land. They say AA started in Akron, Ohio, but have you ever been to Las Vegas? Something else is going on there, And so I've now been to Vegas. I've been to my sponsor's home group, and you guys just haven't seen AA. So I'm gonna come back and grace you with the truth, And so I'm that pain in the rear end that many of us have encountered. But I'm rushing around to get to this meeting, because I'm selfish and I hate the guy who makes the coffee. His coffee's terrible. Nice guy, bad coffee, right? So rather than say anything to him or try and help him, I'm going to get my own coffee, right? So there's this Starbucks in this area of Miami. It's in Brickell where I lived, and it's congested to say the least. And so you got to go over and park your car in this garage and so on. And I'm I got plenty of time, and I'm parking my car to go get my coffee, and I'm going to go chair the new meeting. And I get my coffee. I got plenty of time. I'm going to be a sponsee there. I'm feeling pretty good. I'm going to go show them how AA's done. And I get in my car, and I'm leaving the parking garage. And all of a sudden, I'm on the fourth floor of a parking stack. And it stops, right? And I'm stuck. And now the clock's gone, and the minutes are clicking by, and nobody's moving. And all of a sudden, like a symphony of idiots, everyone starts honking their horn. It's like move, to where? No one's going anywhere. And slowly we inch down, and the mechanical arm on the parking garage is malfunctioning. And there's a poor guy in the toll booth that every person has taken the opportunity to chew their head off. you know. And I'm shameful to say that I joined the party, maybe. You know, all of a sudden you become a parking garage lawyer. You know, and you tell them why they can't do this and how this is wrong. I blow up on the guy. I blow up, right? And I'm just like, hey, I got my coffee. I'm going to be late. Now I'm going to speed through the streets. And I'm like 2 blocks away. And my first thought was, God, I hope nobody from AA saw me do that. Not that I feel bad about doing it, right? I just hope nobody saw me. Okay, I'm good. And then, like, I realized, like, I'm leaving the meeting and going home, and I'm like, I can't do that. Like, that isn't good. So I go back, and I park my car, and I walk up to the toll booth, and he, like, looks at me like crazy. What are you doing here? And my Spanish is better now, but it was non-existent back then, and his English was about as good as my Spanish, and we're just kind of smiling, and I'm like nodding, trying to, I'm sorry, I'm an asshole, we're doing this thing, and we just sort of have like a knowingness. And then every time I would leave that parking garage, we would just smile and nod, you know, kind of like he was my friend. So what had happened to me unknowingly is that I was no longer able to live with the things I could live with before. See, I think maybe we're all born here, and anything we ever wanted to be, we already are, and anything we ever needed, we already have. I think that's how we arrive, right? Like I don't want to offend any tech people, but like a brand new MacBook Pro out of the box, it just works. It just works. No viruses, nothing, you know? And my whole life, I was like an old Windows machine, you know? Maybe if you accidentally, your parents weren't home and you visited a website you shouldn't go to, like, you know, smoke's coming out of the computer tower, your Internet Explorer won't. So I went from this, like, old Windows machine full of viruses to, like, MacBook Pro out of the box. It just works. It just works. And what happens is I can no longer, I've got this thing again. Some might describe it as a conscience. So some might describe it as a thing that's always been there, but I had covered up. It starts to return. My antenna and my connection to something starts to return. And in the returning of that connection, I start to be guided. You know, we're told we have this idea as we go through this process that our thinking, my thinking, which was once so polluted and ineffective, it slowly begins to become on something like a plane of inspiration. I can come to slowly rely on the things that I'm thinking, or the things that are inside of me. And so I start to have these experiences. And maybe what ended up happening for me is each of these things that came out of my inventory. And I like what that old timer that Bob mentioned said, you know, the 7 deadly sins, lust, greed, and the other ones, you know. That is it. Like, I have had moments of lust where I make the Energizer Bunny look timid. You know, this is like this. I am convinced because this is like in doing the sex inventory stuff and seeing, you know, how I was using that, or moreover misusing that, and the harm I was causing. You know, but it's like anything that gets me close to a glimmer of freedom, I will seek until I can't seek it anymore. And I started to cause a lot of harm in that. And then I would try and overcompensate, and then try and go the other way with that stuff. And I think there were 2 fallacies that I think I struggled with around 6 and 7. And the primary one is that there was anything that I could do independently with these. I think the element of humility that activates God's grace is my willingness to surrender that I am powerless and that I must have God to transform me. It's another admission of moving closer to the power that can shape and change me. And in that admission is a full admission that I can't. He can. So I'm going to let the power shape and change me. And in doing that, my behavior slowly start to transform. But I've had moments where I'm gonna exercise virtue in that area because I'm gonna be virtuous, and I'm gonna be abstinent, and I'm gonna be celibate, and here's where I'm gonna go, and then I'm gonna be so good, you know, and then I try and self-will my moral extreme to the other end, and it inevitably fails me, right? It inevitably fails me. And I think the stuff that I deal with, my defects of character, like for me, They're like those old, you ever seen those old children toys? They're Chinese finger cuffs, right? You put your finger, the harder you pull, the tighter they get, right? That's me. Like you get me on one of the elements of my character and my nature, and I'm trying to fix it. The harder I pull, the tighter it gets. Like what really happened for me was like an elegant lifting, beyond me. Nothing to do with me, nothing to do of me. And so there were some more. There were some things I couldn't see, some things I wasn't aware of. And this afternoon we'll get more into the elements of sponsorship that illuminate this. But there seems to be a principle where I undoubtedly get benefit and transformation by going through the spiritual process of transformation and the steps. But without doubt, I receive exponentially more by taking someone else through the transformational process of the steps. And so many of the things that I was doing in my life, and there's a little trap door in step 6 leading into 7, and something must happen for me to become willing. And one of the things that must happen is these behaviors, whether it's lust or greed or dishonesty, I must first find them objectionable. And if I'm being honest with you, I'm not too bothered by a lot of them, right? You might have a problem with all of it, but I'm pretty good with it, And I'm getting along in my life, and there's things that I like and I really enjoy, right? And I'm not willing to give it up. And what would happen for me is I come to sponsor a guy, right? And I got a guy doing the same stuff that I did. I was in Miami, and I'd come out of a relationship, and I'm on hookup sites and dating apps, and I'm trying to outrun myself, with abandoning myself through seeking relationships and sex behavior and all that stuff. Just trying to do a 90 and 90. You know what I mean? Just trying to, I heard that somewhere in a meeting, thought that might apply here. This is the idea, and I'm looking at that, and I can't see it in myself. I'm not bothered by my own behavior, and what will end up happening is God will put into your life, or put into my life, someone who is doing the same thing. And I cannot first see the objectionable nature in my behavior directly in me, but when I see you doing it, it's terrible. How could you do that, right? Oh, I'm doing it. Yeah, it's me. Okay, yeah, right. And then the other thing was a lot of the stuff I was doing, I didn't bother me too much. I just didn't want you to know about it, right? It was more of the overall protection of my image and ego, right? And then there comes a time where the truth of this and the true cleansing for me is there's no way out. Ain't nobody to fool. At 3 a.m. when it's me, my thoughts, and the power that surrounds us all, there's no line to nobody. I'm the only guy that I'm punking out. I'm punking myself out. And so slowly but surely things transform. And I think what ended up happening for me is I had been in this relationship. I think for if you sponsor guys in AA, there's like really 2 things that they believe are the chief things they got to get into here in AA, right? I got to make some money, and I got to go to the gym, right? That's it. Because that's going to fix my real problem, which is finding a girlfriend. Like this is the order of operations, And I have to remind many of my sponsees that what we get is a daily reprieve based upon the maintenance of our spiritual condition and fitness, not our physical fitness, right? They seem to get that wrong. And then there's the order of operations in the book that Bill tells us. In the order of operations, as our mental and physical lives transform, the thing that must precede all of that first is my spiritual condition transforms, followed elegantly without effort by my mental and my physical. I had the order of operations wrong. I'm going to do a kale cleanse, and then I'll pray. Yeah, that's it. Let me get fit first. And so I think the more I think like the more I come to look at the matters of the spiritual principles that we interact with here, I think the reason that I used to think of things but in terms of morality and right and wrong, if there's right and wrong, I can position myself on the side of right, and I can position you on the side of wrong, right? It gives me leverage, right? I can find superiority. But when I look at Bill's clues that he gives us, and this idea of why do we quit playing God because it doesn't work, and I start to look at the things in my life and the defects of my character, are they effective or not? Is it working? What's the truth here? And so I try and look at my behaviors less from a place of morality, because I can get all twisted up judging myself and others on what I think should or shouldn't be working, and how someone else is living successfully is really no business of my own if they're not harming anybody else. And so I had to start looking at my life from, is it successful or not? Is it effective? How does it work? And some things that were effective initially when I got sober, they became less and less effective. And things that I originally didn't find objectionable, I would ultimately come to find objectionable. And I thought I had, I'd gone through this one relationship, and in matters of sex and relationship were really that plus greed, greed and pursuit of money were the two things that troubled me more than anything else. I was able to get a freedom around money through my sponsor's guidance. He had been a successful businessman and entrepreneur, and he helped me early on. He changed everything for me. He talked about how he would work the traditions inside, the principles and the traditions inside of his businesses, and how that transformed and helped him so much. So I started to look at my professional life as an opportunity to serve, where it's like AA is like it's like a training ground. I come in here and I'm some kind of like facsimile or hologram of a good person, and then one day I wake up and it's spilled out into the real world. It's like, oh, I'm showing up the same way. And so in work and business, the other thing I think it was also kind of a trick is the more I started to apply spiritual principles in business, the better I did. It just worked better. So that was pretty cool as well. Had it not worked, I probably would have struggled with it more, but it started to work. And I had gone through this idea, I was in this relationship, and it was a relationship that I knew I shouldn't be in. I got a buddy, our buddy Mike, who I love this guy. He and I talk a lot about this because we're cut from the same cloth. We're a few sandwiches short of a picnic in this area. We just are. And he talks about, like, on his wedding day, ready to walk down the aisle and knowing he shouldn't go, and he goes anyway, and he spends like the next 3 years trying to get out. Like, it's just like, I'm that guy. Rather than upset her, I mean, the banquet's here and the people, let's just go through with it. It's like this is me. We're on the same cell phone plan. Let's just go. It's fine. It's like my whole life. I'll deal with that later. Right? I'll deal with that later. And I'm in this relationship, and I know I shouldn't be in there, but I'm in there, and I've got this deep insecurity that I'm a terrible person. Why do I think that? Because I have evidence for it. Because I'm a liar, I'm a cheater. I remember the one sweetheart I had who I would promise her the world. It's just me and you, baby. House, white picket fence, 2.5 kids, whatever it was, right? And yet I'm putting my head on the pillow every night knowing I ain't going to deliver any of it. I'm waiting for my chance to be a thief in the night. I'm waiting for my way out. And then on some days I would try and instigate her so she would leave me first. So I'm in this relationship, and it was a great training ground. And that was my sponsor's guidance. He goes, the results and the outcome of this are in God's hands. But what you can do is you can act as if and practice the principles and behaviors in this to see if you transform. And what I'm here to say, in that 3-year relationship, we were close to getting engaged, and that young lady had some challenges that we got her help with. And I think by the grace of God, she's doing great now. But it ultimately didn't work out. But what did work out was during that time, as I practiced the principles, something changed in me. Something changed in me. I now had stable evidence that I'm not a scumbag. Right? I might still think I am, but my behaviors say something different. I can show up and serve. I can act differently than the crazy insanity and thoughts in my head. You know what's funny? It's like a muscle that atrophies. They talk about neuroscience, like the neurons that fire together wire together. And the more that I behave and act contrary or against, it's like almost those things, they atrophy. They just kind of fade away. And I woke up one day as that relationship was winding down, and I realized that I had now demonstrated evidence that I could be different or that I could change, right? That, that I wasn't as bad as I thought I was, and how all of that transformed. And I'll talk later about where we move from here, and as we start to get awareness, all we've really done now is had some level of awakening, but without further actions. Right now, all I've really got is information. All I've got is information. And Bob's going to talk about the next actions on how we start to really get this stuff removed. Thanks for letting me share.